This week's literary concepts lesson is about irony. To start off with, we'll talk about the three types of irony. We have verbal irony, situational irony, and dramatic irony. Of the three, verbal irony and situational irony are going to be the ones that you're probably most familiar with. So let's start with verbal irony. Verbal irony is when a speaker intentionally says something that contradicts what they intend to say. In other words, this is sarcasm, hyperbole, and understatement. So anytime you're using sarcasm in a conversation or in writing, that is an example of verbal irony. So the example provided here is that, no, please take your time. I got all day. Again, depending on how you say it and what situation you say it in, this can be taken as sarcastic, or, to say something like, hey, I really like your shirt there, buddy. Looks fantastic, as another example of verbal irony. Situational irony, it has a really long, complicated definition, but really what it's trying to say is that it's what happens when we expect one thing to happen and something else happens instead. So for example, if you saw this lesson and you're like, oh, irony, I'm going to learn about verbal irony, situational irony, and dramatic irony, and instead you're confronted with an iron, like a clothes iron, that would be irony. You expect one thing, but you get another. We see a lot of visual irony, but you also see it in writing as well. The last one is dramatic irony, and what that is when the audience knows more about the situations, the causes of conflicts, and the resolutions before the leading characters or actors. So a really good example of this would be like the Romeo and Juliet's death scene. The fact that we know that Juliet has taken a poison which makes it look like she's dead, but really she's not dead, and of course Romeo kills himself, and then Juliet kills herself. We know all of this before the actors or the characters do, and that's kind of what causes that surprise and that moment where we sit on the edge of our seat and go, don't do it, because we know, and they don't. So that's where we see dramatic irony. So even though it's one we're maybe not as familiar with, you still see it all the time. So again, verbal irony is sarcasm. Situational irony is when we expect one thing and something totally the opposite of it happens. And dramatic irony is the one where we know what's happening before the characters or the actors do. And that's really all there is to irony.